Yeah, so again, Moe Ashor, and formerly known as Muhammad Ashor. So I was born Muhammad, and if anybody knows anything about the name Muhammad, it's originated from the Islamic religion. The Prophet Muhammad was the man who brings Islam into the picture of the world. So me, I grew up born and raised in New York City, Queens, New York specifically, and had a pretty interesting life as we're gonna go through it and break it down and all that good stuff. And yeah, a lot of ups and downs, a lot of downs, and which from hindsight, looking back, there was a point in time where I looked at a lot of these down times in my life and these problems and all these crazy things that happened, and from the outside looking in, you're just like, dang, like this sucks, right? This sucks for any human being to have to go through that. But in hindsight now, looking back as a believer, especially, and seeing what God has done and what God has brought from it, I can totally see Jesus like fingerprints all over it, right? And not that I'm saying that necessarily like Jesus did, or like God in general did anything to cause me like pain or cause any of these like troubles to happen. Like, people are people. The people that contributed to my life, family, parents, friends, all of this stuff, that did really horrific things, including the things that I did pretty horrifically. And you will wait till the end to judge me on that one. Yeah. But yeah, so,
you'll have plenty to judge him for along the way.
A lot, and there's still plenty to judge me for if you really truly wanted to do so. However, yeah, so had a pretty interesting life. Moved around a lot. Predominantly most of my childhood in New York City until I was about 16 years old, when
That's where you were born, Mo? New York City?
Yeah, in Queens specifically. And yeah, so at 16 I moved out of New York. I spent 2 years in Michigan, and the rest of the time since then has been in Colorado. But as we go along the story, you'll see that there's like a lot packed into each of those phases in each of those states.
So why don't you just give a little bit of a description of what your home was like with your mom, with your dad, your brothers, your friends, what's just a little bit about you, just be a little bit personal.
Okay, fair enough. Well, again, I grew up a Muslim, right? So I was born into a Muslim family. Now, mind you, this family wasn't a religious Muslim family, right? They were just your typical, we believe, but we're not necessarily practicing. We didn't pray there 5 times a day. Didn't spend time reading the Quran. They didn't spend time with their kids teaching them the Quran or anything. Of course, stories that were Quranic based and biblically based as well, came up and were told a lot. But aside from that, nothing major, right? We celebrated holidays like everybody else. So we were the version of your Christians that would just show up on Easter and Christmas to church and, on occasional Sunday, right? Not even a regular Sunday thing. This was very occasional. But, my mother and father were very, very interesting people. And when I say interesting, I mean I love them to death. And, I even now still work on a lot of the forgiveness aspect of things, but they have had their issues. Let me put it that way. Like everyone, but they've had their very unique set of issues. From the get-go, my grandfather, my mother's father, wasn't, very excited about the relationship between them. He actually knew my dad prior to them meeting. She met him at my grandfather's house. I think they were doing some kind of business together or whatever. And when they wanted to hook up or get married, my grandfather was anti that idea.
And this is on your mom's side, right?
This is on my mom's side.
Was she Muslim growing up too? Both of them.
Yeah.
Okay.
And again, both of them on both sides they didn't come from necessarily practicing religious backgrounds.
So it'd be like today and like the Southern Bible Belt. You just grow up Christian, you go on Sundays, but it might not be something extremely personal to you, a personal relationship, not to just throw a blanket accusation out there, but sometimes it's just I'm a Christian, but it's not really you're not really sold out to that relationship. So they were Muslim and they did the Muslim things, but it wasn't like a sold out. It's kind of just like a way of life.
Right. And don't get me wrong. Like if you ask any Muslim, and including my parents, they're like, yeah, I am Muslim. That is who I am. That is my identity, right? Like that's the clear thing about Islam and Muslims in general versus like any other religions. Like that's engraved into their identity one way or another, right? Whether they're sold out, like in the sense of practicing, like they love God so much that they're just chasing him with their like, day in and day out routines or not, so they were the not part, right? They don't. So anyway, they were pretty crazy. My father and mother just finally got hitched and ended up getting married, ended up having me within a year. My dad at that point already had a daughter from a previous marriage. So I have an older half Dominican, half Egyptian sister. So that's that part.
Have I met her yet? Do I know who this is?
No, you have never met her.
Okay,
no,
do you guys stay in contact? Or?
We do now more than we had in the recent past, right? So growing up, we were definitely closer. We spent a lot more time together. She came a lot on weekends, summers, and stuff like that. So we were definitely closer growing up, but there was still this rift, right? She was still like, different in the sense, right? Like she didn't like she had her own like sort of like upbringing, and traditions, and it's because obviously like the Hispanic culture of coming like from a Dominican culture to an Arabic culture is very, very different in the sense of like modesty or traditions, like they're just completely different, right? So anyway, like, and at the same time, because my dad didn't spend like day in, day out with her in the early on years, he like, when she did come around, like she was very favored, right? Like, she got like, certain things that, and got away with certain things or got certain, what's the right word from it, for that I'm trying to think of? Treatment. Yeah. Just like preferential treatment. Right. Sure. And as a father now, when I get like, my daughter who would live part-time away, I get it. Like I totally do. Like, you definitely want to try to like make the experience as like, comfortable as possible for them while like, trying to make it fair at the same time. Like I'm very aware of that. Maybe he wasn't. But anyway, as a kid looking back, not looking back, but as a kid, I didn't like that like difference. Right? I'm just like, hold up. No, I'm like, I get beat for everything I do wrong. Like, I've never seen her get a whooping. Like, like that was a big issue for me. But at this point now, like, I don't hold anything against us. I hear, I'm sorry.
No, that's funny. My family has that same dynamic too, but it's the other way around. Like me and my older brothers, we got all the beatings, but my little sister, I guess we just wore my dad out so bad. Like
your sister took lessons from you. She knew exactly what not to do.
Yeah, well, no, you would be surprised. No, he was just like, all right, I've learned the Morel children, like, they're not going to learn. So I'm just going to let it slide this time, show a little bit more grace than discipline. And I mean, my sister turned out more wonderful than me and my brothers. So.
Right. And so the funny thing is too, I have a younger full sister, right? and I think it actually was more of a girl thing than anything. Like
for sure.
Like now looking back, because she got also like she was, handled gentler by my father, who was a very like Arab man, and like a very like disciplinarian, like, and can be very set off very easily and for weird reasons, right? He just was an abusive person, right? And he was abusive not only to me and my siblings, but more like what affected us, I think, more than our own like whoopings that we caught was like seeing my mom go through it, right? And and my mother on her end, she was the type that stuck with us through thick and thin, but she had her own issues as well. Like till now, like while there's no like official diagnosis, I feel like, there may have been a little bit of bipolar like in there. And I'm sure my dad didn't help with like, her like mental sanity throughout the years either. Right. Sure. So, in any good marriage, you have certain things. You have like, a woman who needs to be loved and respected, you know what I mean? And that definitely wasn't there, because they weren't married officially, legally in the United States. There was also another marriage involved in the United States, and because of that marriage, we were shipped off to Egypt because it got to the point where my mom, when she found out about it, she was causing too much of a ruckus for him, and I guess like it was inconvenient to like have a different marriage.
How old were you when that happened?
Let's see here. I would say I went to Egypt when I was 7, so it definitely went early on in the year. So like I think I was in the second grade year round. Like so I was like maybe like between 7 and 9 years old.
Yeah.
No, I definitely was between 6 and 7 years old. I'm sorry, when that marriage was taking place with the Ecuadorian woman. And so yeah, that was a pretty crazy dynamic. So like between, you know, being born and that point, like I said, I witnessed a ton of abuse. Now, here's the thing. Another thing is like my father was, and mother, they both like never had like any substance abuse issues, right? So like these are tendencies that you would normally see a lot with like alcoholic fathers and stuff like that, or, you know, drug addict, you know, families or whatever, but that was never the issue. Cigarettes were their vice, like both my mom and dad. So anyway, so the abuse was pretty tremendous. So that was pretty traumatic for us growing up, witnessing that. And I don't mean like, you know, a slap here and there. I'm talking about like, like blood was shed. Yeah. So not knowing at the time, but knowing now, like how much of an effect that had on me.
Right,
like,
that's pretty graphic at a young age.
Oh, very.
Yeah.
Yeah. Watching like your mother on the floor and your dad on top of her, like literally throwing blows at her, you know, like grabbing by the hair, like pushing it, like, I mean, like almost like trying to bury it into the ground, almost like through tile. It was that kind of level of abuse. So,
did that abuse ever get inflicted on you or your siblings at all?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely, especially me and my younger brother, we definitely got beaten, but like, it wasn't to the point where it's just like we broke bones or like anything like that. Like it never got to that extent, but it wasn't even like, you know, because I do believe like, you know, especially coming from the cultures that they came from, like this physical discipline is not out of the ordinary. Right. But when it came to them, it was more like out of what reaction or what reasons that we were getting disciplined that weren't really disciplined. Like it was just like you lashing out because of your trauma or your problems kind of issues. You know what I mean? We received the butt end of that a lot. A lot from my mother and father. You know, we had moved around a few times, 3-4 times. By the time I was even like 6-7 years old. But I had a really decent encounter in my life with, you know, the neighborhood I grew up in from kindergarten to second grade. That was in a place called Sunnyside, Queens. And I had some people that, like, you know, in my classes from kindergarten to first grade and second grade in that one school, PS 150, that ended up being lifelong friends, right? Like till this day, like we are... Every time I come to New York, it's a lot of times you've met some of them. They've come out here, right. You know, and it's like, you know, we gather and it's like no time has been lost, right? And a lot of them still like live in the Sunnyside area, so they're still very tight, and you know, so we have a very close relationship. So that was like one of the very few bright spots in my life was those like what fruition from those friendships. So anyway, fast forward a little bit from Sunnyside. We moved into this house in Woodside, which is not too far from that area. And it was like almost like the first time I was starting to see like, oh, like this is nice. Like when going from a 1-bedroom apartment, 2-bedroom apartment in Queens, you know, to an actual family house with a small yard and a basement and our own rooms, like that was really cool. Right, I like that was the closest thing to what I would watch on like, you know, family sitcoms on TV. You know what I mean? Right. Like I was just like, man, that looks cool. Right. So, but then that didn't last long, right? Like my father was the type who was while he was very hardworking, he was very unstable. He never stayed doing the same thing twice. He always like partnered up and always wanted to do business, but always partnered up with like the worst people possible that either, you know, I don't know if they saw him as like a really bad business partner and just like cut him out when the time was needed to cut him out or whatever. I don't know how that like took place, but it just never worked out. So he did a lot of things and money was just never something that was constant or stable.
Has that affected your adulthood in keeping a job and providing for your kids?
I'm sure it has. I mean, because I'm better at it now, but I'm always like looking on to the best next thing, right?
Sure.
Like I'm never satisfied, especially with like working a regular 9 to 5. I've always, but that's just, I think a lot also part of my entrepreneurship nature. Like I'm not the type, like personality wise, that likes to do a 9 to 5 for someone else. So yeah. So anyway, we moved into this house. That's when his marriage was taking place to this other lady, and my mom finds out about it, and she's causing a ruckus. She doesn't like it, obviously. What woman would? Right. And the beatings were starting to escalate. So I don't know. Somehow it just turned up that we were going to Egypt for summer, which wasn't and that's like, that's my heritage, FYI, to the people watching and listening to this. I'm an Egyptian American. And both my parents are Egyptian, and as far as back as I can remember, everybody's Egyptian. I don't have any mixes other than that I know of. But yeah, so we'd go to Egypt on the summers occasionally, and this summer the difference was the fact that we just didn't come back. Mm-hmm. So I guess my father saw it as an opportunity to have us out of the way, have this new marriage and this new life with this lady. So it was almost like we were just like, okay, we're gonna live here now. I'm like, hold on, what? Like, how do? Keep in mind, I spoke Arabic because that was like the language we used at home, sure. But I didn't know how to read and write it. I wasn't accustomed to the Egyptian educational system, which is very different than what in America is. Like your teachers didn't beat you in America like they did in Egypt, right? That's a very different thing to be introduced to. So. It was, and even the Egyptian schools, when they were trying to integrate me in, immediately they were just like, yeah, this is not going to work. He's already too far along. So
did they treat you bad at school?
No. Actually, I was the center of attention. It was awesome.
You're so different.
Oh yeah, I was the American kid, right?
So what did you what was your outlet for all of this pent up with your home life, seeing what happened with your mom and your dad? Who did you naturally gravitate to?
Friends. The only outlet I've ever had was outside of the home, right? Okay. The only good that I could gravitate to, the only constant was school, the teachers, the friendships that I built up in classes and everything like that. But that, obviously through the years became very difficult because I could pretty much say that by the time I was 14, I moved 14 times. That I could count, that I know of. Right, that's a lot. Hard to make friendships in that manner.
Absolutely.
Right? And it just it got increasingly worse the moment we came back from Egypt 2 years after he abandoned us, pretty much there. So because the Egyptian school system realized real quick that I wasn't able to integrate, you know what I mean? There was private, more charter American or international based schools that I could have taken part of, but they costed a lot of money, and my dad was just not someone that cared to spend a lot of money on anything that was actually important, right. Like his children and his family. Mm-hmm. So it was just the fact so that we were just there, and I spent 2 years there. My younger sibling, my sister, ended up going to school there, but she was a lot younger, so she was able to adapt. But on my end, I actually spent 2 years where I was supposed to be 3rd and 4th grade in Egypt without any schooling, right? Wow. So I didn't go to school at all.
As a kid, you probably loved it, though.
To be honest with you, I loved schools. Again, school was my outlet in New York, right? Gotcha. But when all that craziness was happening, so I didn't mind, school. I didn't dislike it as a kid, right? Of course, in the mornings, maybe. Who does good kid likes to wake up and go to school more? But once I was there, I was loving it. Right.
So when your dad sent you guys off to Egypt, was he just completely out of the picture during this time? Or?
No, not completely. He would come every some odd months. Sometimes it would be 6 months. Sometimes it would be a year. So it was I think 2 or 3 times in that 2-year period where he came.
Did you miss him?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, so even seeing that, you still felt a real strong connection with him.
That's that crazy toxicity, right? Where, while I, of course, hated what was taking place, the abuse or whatever, but it was so normal, in the occurrence, it didn't get me to the point at that age, at least, to hate him for it. He was still the only father that I knew. I didn't have a basis of comparison to saying this was a bad father. Right. It was just my father. Right. So at that time, no, I didn't hate him. As a matter of fact, I loved my father. And I still do. It just like I said, it's a different dynamic now with me being a father myself. I'm just like, whoa, looking back, I'm like, how did you manage to do this? Like, you know what I mean? Like, how did you justify this? But anyway, yeah, so that was a real struggle. But when I was a kid, I didn't notice it. I missed him. And when he was gone and when he was around, I tried to please him, like by like, you know, doing whatever he would like necessarily would want. But he was a very hard man to please. Like I still had the attention span of a kid. I still had like the same like level of like intelligence as a kid. And it's just like if I didn't get something or think the way he wanted me to think, and in like regards to like doing something together with him, he would snap and go nuts and like, you know, whatever. So that was a normal dynamic between us. But when we were in Egypt, you know, the times he was there, again, I witnessed a lot of abuse, and the abuse continued to get worse, right? Because the worse the abuse got and the more normal it became over the years, the more I guess my mom was also like just expecting it. And like she also like didn't do much to like hide in a corner necessarily and try not to set him off. Mm-hmm. She was like, yeah, like I know what sets you off. I'm going to set you off, right? Even though it was like, I mean, like, woman, you're going to get like, like in my mind, like I was as a kid looking back, I'm just like, shut up. Like you're going to get your butt beat. Like, you know what I mean? Like, don't do that, right? I'm like, and I remember like yelling at my mom to stop because I know it's like, I see him turning, right? And I see that and I know where that's going to go. But you know,
your mom sounds like she's a really tough woman.
Oh, she is
very, very
absolutely
strong-willed and.
Oh my God, strong-willed. Oh my God, like, and if my sisters or my brothers are listening to this, they'll tell you yes. Like, very hard-headed. Arabs in general are hard-headed. My parents are just like, wow.
So it starts to make sense,
right?
You know, with our friendship, but.
Oh, really? You're going to do that? Mind you, users, he called me like Judas like 2 hours ago.
Okay, all right. We're not going to...
Just kidding, though. We were just laughing, joking.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, yeah. So, like I said, Egypt, like, you know, the times he came to Egypt, even though, like, I missed him and all that, it was really crazy. Like, it just got really bad every time. Mm-hmm. It got really bad. We built up an apartment that his mother owned. And she, like, there was this building that she owned, and there was, like, this, like... this floor that was unfinished on the top level, and we finished it. We like closed it up, made it look really nice, and etc. It was pretty extravagant for what it was, like Egyptian, like, you know, like Egypt level, you know, middle class and up wise, like because of American dollars and how it translates over there. Like we could buy a lot more for your money over there.
Sure.
So yeah, but the only issue is that like on the 2 floors below me, the floor below me was his brother, who lived there with his wife and kids. So my uncle and aunt and my cousins. And the floor below them was my grandmother, his mother. But she was, at that point, so far off. Like, she had Alzheimer's and dementia really bad.
Oh, wow.
Where, like, she just had, like, an occasional caregiver coming by, like, to check in on her. And, like, the sad part is, like, they just, like, at times what I, like, now know is, like, they have abandoned her for, like, sometimes days. Right, like locked into this apartment, like she couldn't come in and out, you know what I mean, freely or anything, obviously, you know, with that level of dementia and everything. So anyway, and the dynamics between that was like, you know, because of our American upbringing, you know, we obviously had like a level of standard almost that like was not much here in the American level, but in Egypt, yeah, like it's a high standard, right? Especially for my cousins and my aunt and my uncle over there. Mm-hmm. And that was a lot more obvious when my dad wasn't there, their resentment towards that, right? So we dealt with a lot of like, you know, subliminal bullying from my aunt towards my mother and, you know, from my cousins towards me and my siblings. But yeah, there was one incident where I remember we were at my uncle's apartment downstairs and we had this like American movie on. Because it's the only thing we like to watch as kids, you know, and all that. So, like, we were watching this American movie on, and I remember my mom, and my older sister, by the way, was there too at the time, my older half-sister. And I remember my mom talking to my sister, and she's like, she felt something wrong with the dynamic between her and my uncle, right? There was something like that she didn't trust happening. So I don't even know why we were there to begin with, if that was the case, but, like, you know, and in that culture, like, you know, the woman is a little bit more subservient, you know what I mean? So to a certain extent, you still have to do what you're told, even though it's not like your husband. Anyway, So we were there in his apartment. We were watching a movie. And I remember my mom telling my sister, like, hey, and if I tell you in English something, I forgot what the code word was, don't leave. And I remember right when the movie was over, my uncle was telling us to go back upstairs to our apartment, right? Like just the kids. And my mom gave my sister the code word. So again, I didn't really think anything of it until I saw that start to happen.
Yeah.
And my sister was just like, no, I don't want to go. And my uncle started getting really pissed off. Like he was like really starting to get like, you know, like short and angry, like go upstairs. Like, you know what I mean? Like getting angry about it. And and sorry, there's a lot of like history and a lot of like craziness. So if like I let off, you know, a word here or two,
this is the podcast where we like we want to reach those in the Christian community, but we also want to reach people that are even considering this.
Right.
And
like be authentic as part of the story.
Be authentic.
Yeah,
this is cool. We're not censoring.
Right. I'm not going to like let off a bunch of like curse words, but keep in mind, one, I am a New Yorker. Two, I have a really, really bad past. So it's hard to like revisit those pasts without like, you know, feeling the same way that I used to feel.
Yeah, for sure.
That's totally understandable.
We want to capture that. That's really important to what we're doing with this project.
Absolutely. Fair enough.
So just be as authentic. Like, don't give try to give a presentation of what your story was like that you want people to see. Like telling it how it is. This is awesome. This is what I crave. I crave to hear the authentic side of people's stories, like how cruddy it really was, you know, and obviously we'll get to the redemption part at some point.
At some point.
But
it's coming. It's a long ways up. I'm just kidding. I'm talking. No, seriously. It was a crazy moment in my like history, right? Aside from like witnessing some severe beatings, at this point, this was the next craziest thing, right? So I was young enough to be like confused as to what was happening, but old enough to know like, I think I know what's happening, right?
Yep.
So
your siblings are in the process of going upstairs,
right? But my older sister's getting the code word, and she's being told to stay, but my uncle's like telling her like sternly to leave. So she's feeling like this like weird dynamic. She doesn't know who to listen to.
Yeah,
right.
Well, it's like being asked to make an adult like decision as a kid,
right?
Like you're doing something against authority,
right?
You know, so
looking back 2020, like hindsight 2020, you know what I mean? Like, you know, why were we there to begin with? If something was a little off, like, you know, or whatever, I don't know. I don't know the backstories to that or the details to that, but I know my mom was not comfortable at that moment and didn't want to stay there, to the point where like we did end up going upstairs, the kids. And not too long after, there was, again, they were right below us, like the floor right below us, and there was only one apartment per floor. That, like, you know, so then here's my mom screaming, like, trying to get out of their door, because I have my door still open, and I'm listening to what's happening downstairs, and they're screaming. And then there's my mom, like, shortly after, so it wasn't like maybe, and again, it was really long ago, so I don't know how long it took. But it was like very shortly after she comes up and she has like all these, like, her dress is kind of ripped. She has like all these scratches on her, and she comes into the door, slams it, locks it, and she's like in a frantic, you know, hysterical episode kind of thing going on. And I just remember feeling like, I wish I was bigger. I wish I was older. You know, at that point, that's when I felt like, I guess, my first anger, like, where I'm just like to be defensive, to be protective, you know what I mean, over family or something like that, you know? And like my view of him since then changed, right? And like, I didn't trust him. I didn't care for him. I struggled with my father for putting us in that position.
No, for sure.
But also, the struggle, really more of that, the worst part about it is that when he finally, I remember my mom trying to tell him about it, and almost like he was like, either he didn't believe her, or he just didn't, he's just like, oh, what the hell am I supposed to do about it?
God, that is...
You know what I mean? It was like that level of like, when I felt that from him, like that's when the dynamic between me and my dad started changing, right? Again, for a very long time afterwards, I still tried to please him. I still tried to appease him. I still tried to like have him like accept me and like, you know, be proud of me, that kind of thing.
Right.
But
well, it's not like you were, you know, in your teenage years at this point. You're still a little kid.
Right.
You know,
exactly.
8 years old, 9 years old. Like, I'd imagine if you're like 14, 15, that dynamic is going to be exponentially different. Seeing that happen.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. So now, and again, that's the family dynamic, right? That was what was happening inside of the family. Those are the main memories that I can give you of like the trauma. Now, on the other side of things, you know, in that same building, my grandmother built a mosque at the bottom, right, for the community, for the like the area that we were in. And in that mosque, there was, you know, this imam who's like, you know, like what we would call a pastor. And he's the one I ran it, and he took a liking to me. But here's the thing, like, I didn't grow up in a religious household, right? I never really like, but something during that time, maybe it's because I needed something bigger than what was happening inside. I don't know. But I went down for a Friday prayer, which was like, you know, what we would consider Sunday services. And when I went down for that Friday prayer, they had like the sermon prior to it and as well as the main prayer. And I don't know, something like that he was delivering in that sermon like hit me, right? Like, and I was just so fascinated by the idea of God and the idea of the way God used people and to like orchestrate his will and miracles that would occur because of it and stuff like that, right? As a child, that like blew my mind, and like it captured me, right? And from that point on, I just like dedicated myself, right? I went like literally, and it was convenient the fact that the mosque was like there, like in the building, right? So even though it was, don't get me wrong, if you went up and down those flights, it's like we lived on the, I think, 7th or 8th floor. And there was no elevator, so like you would literally go down those flights every day.
Was it common for like culturally for your family to live together like they did in, you know, one story above another kind of thing, or was that just happened to be the way it was?
That just happened to be the way it was. I mean, again, it was, my dad did a lot of things for the sake of affordability, and of course because his mom built a building for them, like we owned it already technically, so he didn't have to pay like rent anywhere. And we did a little bit of that while the apartment was being built while we were there, but you know, once that was taken care of and built up, you know, that's where we resided. So anyway, I found like my outlet, right? My outlet like through faith, and then so I would go down 5 times a day, including the 4:30 to 5:30 a.m. like Fajr prayer, and you know, like I said, and then the imam in the mosque took a liking to me. And he was like, you know, and he knew me. I mean, like everybody knew us on that block in that area, right? We are the Americans, right? Like, it's hard to not notice us, right? We dress differently, we act differently, or even like our speech was, especially with the kids, was like, you know, you can tell when someone has like a broken accent, and like we definitely had like the Americanized accent for sure, with our like when we spoke Arabic. So anyway, so he knew us, he knew my mom, he knew my dad, everything like that. And he was close with my uncle, by the way, that uncle that attempted to rape my mom. And I'm calling that out right now, publicly. Anyway.
I mean, I don't know what else you had like.
I don't know.
Well, you're bigger now.
This is the first public setting that I've ever like had a conversation about this. Like, I've recently started talking about this inside of my family. Like my siblings and my younger siblings, they're like, really, that happened? Like we were there? Like, yeah, but like you were too young to know like what was going on. Even I was barely at the age where I was like figuring it out.
Thank you for being open with us, by the way. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you, I guess. Thank you for giving me the outlet. Sure.
We might need those tissues after all on the table.
I brought them close. I don't know where they are.
They're over on the counter. We'll wait for round 2.
Yeah, I had to pause there because like I felt myself like choking up.
I know, I could tell. I was.
It's all good, man.
Some stuff, man.
So yeah, the outlet was really, really important to me. It was in a really important time in my life. And not only that, but I met like a couple of guys who were like, I think maybe between the ages of like 15 and 17 that were good friends. Like a couple of them were good friends, and they took a liking to me, right? Like, and they were like, I was almost like a 9-year-old kid that they could like, you know, look after and, watch over, and like, I don't know what people like about me, but they like me, and nothing was weird about it. They were just like, and it almost like they helped disciple me to a certain extent as well in the Islamic faith, right? They were more on the religious end as well. They were like believers that followed the beliefs and were pursuing God to their understanding of it. And then, so the Imam took me under his wing. We studied every single morning right after the Fajr prayer. We spent like 2-3 hours together, studying the Quran, the history of the Quran, memorizing the Quran. So by the time I was 9, so this started around, I think maybe like I was 7.5, 8 years old. By the time I was 9 years old, I had memorized half the Quran, like word for word. Right. Till this day, it's still ingrained in me. I can like recite a ton of the scriptures, which kills me because like I started studying the Bible at like a lot older of an age, and like my memory retention is not there anymore. Right. Like, so I get like kind of convicted by them. I wish I could like memorize verses in the Bible, like, and it's in English. I'm like, I didn't even understand half the stuff that was in the Quran. Right. Like, but I memorized it. I could recite it, but a lot of it I didn't understand at the time until I grew up. Right. Anyway, so. Yeah, it was like I was dedicated for praying 5 times a day, studying. Again, no one pushed me, no one pressured me into this. I just was so enamored by the idea of God and wanting to have a relationship with God. And I remember my prayers like were constantly about my family, like constantly like asking for peace, within my family, like within my mother and father, within like with our dynamics, and And, like, there was a lot of struggles, like, even to the point where, like, I even, like, I was, like, a bedwetter for, like, way longer than I should have been, right? And, like, it was, like, only to come to realize now that was because of a lot of the trauma. I didn't know how to deal with it during the day. Anyway, so, like, there were so many things going on, and that was my way out. Like, that was like, I felt like that was my escape. That was my way to redemption, that the miracle was going to occur at some point.
Probably gave you a bigger purpose, too.
Right. Yeah. Definitely gave me a lot bigger purpose. It gave me something to look to outside of what was happening inside of that apartment. Totally. Right? Totally. So finally, I get a little older. At some point during this dynamic, right? And at this point, I've had a lot of really good friendships. I made a lot of really good friendships of my own. I wouldn't say lifelong, but like they were a pivotal point in my upbringing. And then we get the call. My dad was bringing us back to the United States, right? And it was like a party practically with me and my siblings and my mom, right? Like, we're going back to America. Yes, right? Like, we're leaving this hellhole. And I hate to say that about Egypt, but like at the time, like it was just like, we missed it, right? Like we had a ton of like VCR tapes that my dad recorded of like different cartoons, different movies and stuff like that. But 2 years in, we've watched every single movie and cartoon 100 times.
So you could recite the cartoons
every single one, right? Every single one, from like Home Alone to like, I don't know, like what movies were out, like the Donald Duck, like, cartoons, the Ninja Turtles, the Power Rangers. I missed the Power Rangers. I was like, that was my era, right? Yeah. When it was introduced. Oh, funny sidetrack story. One Ramadan season in Egypt, right? They on the TV, they like had this build up, right? They were like during this Ramadan, we're going to play Power Rangers from America, right? And I'm just like, oh. Like, yes. Wow. Yes. Like, awesome. Keep in mind, like, there's no cable out there, right? It's like 4 channels, like, at the time, right? Like, there was nothing, like, and it was all Arabic, right? Like all, like either Quran or, like, Arabic music or like, and the news and, like, maybe one channel where, like, they're playing movies or TV shows at the time or something like that, right? So anyway, I was like enamored, right? I was like, yes, like this is awesome, like Power Rangers, right? And it's like, and they announced this months ahead of time. So finally the time came, right? After months of waiting and waiting, trust me, like there's nothing else to do. I was waiting for this, right? Like diligently. So finally, when this thing arrives, right? I'm like at the like season premiere or whatever, and I'm like got the popcorn out, or I don't even know if there was popcorn at the time, but like there was like whatever, like I was ready. Yeah. And it plays, and it's playing and they're talking, like they've dubbed it over in Arabic, right? And it's not like even like regular like Arabic, it's like the more like, how do I put it in, like, so it's like our English in America versus like UK English. right?
Okay, yeah.
So like it had that thick of like an accent, like kind of thing, right? It's like the same Arabic that they use in the Quran, right? Yeah. Like it's different than the Arabic that they speak in Egypt, to understand, but you could still understand it. But anyway, it just ruined it for me. And like it just like it sounded so corny dubbed over, right? Like they're talking in American, right? Like their lip movements and everything is, and like you can tell they're trying to say they're saying American words,
right?
But there's like this weird Arabic voice that like isn't getting the understanding of like what's happening in the show necessarily. So his like vocal inflections is not matching what's going on,
right? Yeah.
So it was just like it was so poor in quality, and like I'm sure like the other Egyptians around, of course, they like thought it was great, right? But for me, knowing the Power Rangers and how I grew up with them, I'm like, this is stupid. Like I was done at this point. I want to go back home to America now.
Right.
Like this is it. Like I want my American TV.
Power Rangers
I want my American TV. I want my American. Like I want to go back to American schools. Give me something. Yeah. Right. So anyway, when we got that call to go to America, it was a celebration. Right. It was amazing. I wish I could say that when we came back to America, like that things got better. It just like it was crazy. So we got back and we were at that point in a studio apartment in a place called Rego Park, also in Queens, not too far off. But we were in a studio apartment, and that, mind you, it's me, 3 siblings, my mom and dad, and no bedrooms, right? So,
wow,
yeah, pretty crazy. And when I came back to America, you know, and they were trying to re-enroll me in school. Keep in mind, I didn't go to school during 3rd and 4th grade. So the likely step, I mean, the logical step for the school was to like put me in like 3rd grade as a 5th grader, or at the age of a 5th grader. But my parents decided it would be a better idea to just lie and say I was in school in Egypt the whole time for 3rd and 4th grade. And just, you know, and at that time they didn't really like check records or anything like that. They just took their word.
I mean, what are they going to do?
Right, exactly.
Right. We're in a different country.
Right.
Yeah,
now, I mean, well, like now it's like they'll check records and like they want transcripts. They don't know so what subject, how far advanced they are in these subjects. At that time, they're like, okay, you're in 3rd grade level, 5th grade level. That's really it.
Yep.
And so so mind you, I'm pretty much like at a 2nd grade level. Right, because that's the last grade I passed. Right? I have a 2nd grade level education in 5th grade. There's a lot that goes on between 2nd and 5th grade in regards to like
you learn.
You go from very simple mathematics, very simple reading and writing to like advanced reading and writing and advanced mathematics. Right, like so I'm like here like the last thing I learned was like basic multiplication, and they're like these dudes are dividing fractions. I'm like, what is a fraction? Like I don't even know what that is.
Did they end up holding you back at the end of that? Or?
Believe it or not, no, because like
you're just that smart.
Right. Well, at the end of the time, right, I mean, keep in mind, like there was something called social promotion, and it was like this weird thing that New York was doing for a while, that like they would pass you as long as you weren't like a completely like retarded kid or like you had a learning disability. And I'm like, okay, maybe I should be a little bit more politically correct here. I'm sorry if I said anything like to offend anyone in this day and age. Again, I'm a New Yorker. I talk like a New Yorker, so forgive me. So like I wasn't causing like any troublesome kid or anything like that. But like, you know, and I kept up in certain areas, but certain areas I just like they weren't going to go back and teach me 3rd and 4th grade stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so like
sure.
I just like sat there, and math became like something that when I was good at it at a young age, that was like my biggest fear at that point, right? Because I had no idea what I was looking at when it came to tests and everything. But they had social promotion, so they still passed me. So they did that for 5th to 6th, 6th to 7th, 7th to 8th, and they just kept passing me along. I don't even know how the heck I got into high school, to be honest with you. Like test scores wise, like I wasn't ready, right? Like, and it just kept happening. Like, and no one like took the time, especially not in the New York public educational system, where they're like, "Yo, this kid needs help. Like, he's obviously." Like I see that a lot more out here with like, you know, when my kid is like falling a little behind, they're like, I get calls from the teachers and emails and messages and all that on like their portal or whatever. Like I'm like, man, I wish I had that growing up, right? Yep. Nobody cared, you know what I mean? Like growing up. So
what? So you're in 5th grade at this point,
right? Should
be in 3rd grade.
Should be. So this was a crazy point in my life. At this point.
Okay. So before we get into that, I think this would be a good time to just kind of
like paid product placement.
I mean, maybe
a message from our sponsors.
Yeah, right. But we don't have any sponsors yet.
We have a lot of slots available for sponsors.
All of the slots, actually.
I don't know, but we're about 45 minutes in, so we're gonna come back and you're gonna finish out your story, but we'll catch up to where we left off right now and keep going from there.